Marcus Chen stood at attention beside the ornate doors of the diplomatic chambers, his black uniform pristine despite the long hours of duty. The golden insignia on his collar marked him as a member of the Terran Royal Guard, though to the alien delegates filing past, he looked like nothing more than decoration. The Zephyrian ambassador, a tall creature with blue-scaled skin and 4 arms, paused as he passed Marcus. His large yellow eyes studied the human with obvious disdain. "How quaint," the ambassador said to his aide in heavily accented standard. "The humans still cling to their primitive traditions, posting guards like museum pieces." Marcus remained motionless, his gray eyes fixed straight ahead. 20 years of service had taught him patience. The ambassador's words were meant to provoke, to test the legendary discipline of Earth's Royal Guard. He had heard worse. The diplomatic summit on Kepler Station was entering its 3rd day. Representatives from 12 species had gathered to discuss trade routes through the contested Outer Rim territories. Earth, despite being the youngest spacefaring civilization, had been invited due to their growing influence in the region. "Tell me, soldier." The Zephyrian ambassador stepped closer, his breath carrying the scent of sulfur. "What exactly do you guard against here? Pirates, assassins, or perhaps angry tourists?" His aide, a smaller reptilian creature, hissed what sounded like laughter. Several other delegates had stopped to watch the exchange, sensing entertainment. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, the Corvani war leader with his bone spikes jutting from his skull. The ethereal luminari whose form seemed to shift between solid and gas. The insectoid Thrix delegation with their clicking mandibles. All of them viewed humanity as newcomers, barely worth respect. "Your silence is quite telling," the ambassador continued, circling Marcus slowly. "I wonder what qualifications one needs to stand here and look pretty. Can you even fight human?" The war leader laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Zephyr, leave the decoration alone. These soft-skinned creatures wouldn't last 5 minutes in real combat." "Is that so?" The ambassador's tone grew more aggressive. "I've heard stories about Earth's military. They say humans are resourceful. But looking at this specimen, I find such claims difficult to believe." Marcus felt his jaw tighten slightly, but his expression remained neutral. Protocol demanded he ignore provocation unless directly threatened. These creatures were testing boundaries, probing for weakness. It was a dance as old as civilization itself. The Thrix representative skittered forward on 6 legs, its compound eyes glinting. "Perhaps we should test these claims. A simple demonstration of capability." "An excellent idea," the ambassador agreed. "Surely our human friend here wouldn't mind showing us what makes Earth's guards so special?" The corridor had filled with more delegates now, drawn by the growing tension. Marcus recognized the politics at play. Earth was the smallest delegation, the newest member of the galactic community. Humiliating their representative would send a message about humanity's place in the cosmic order. "I'm afraid I must decline," Marcus said finally, his voice calm and measured. "I'm on duty." The ambassador's laugh was sharp and mocking. "Duty? How wonderfully quaint! But surely you can spare a moment for our curiosity?" One of the Corvani stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over Marcus. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall, his bone armor gleaming under the station's lights. "On my world, guards who cannot fight are called corpses." The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt the familiar weight of his sidearm against his hip, the reassuring presence of his combat knife at his back. But weapons were forbidden in the diplomatic sectors. This confrontation would have to remain verbal. "Your restraint is admirable," the Luminari delegate said, its voice like wind chimes. "But perhaps misplaced. On our world, honor demands response to such challenges." Marcus turned his head slightly, meeting the creature's shifting gaze. Honor also demands respect for protocol and the safety of diplomats under our protection." "Protection?" The Zephyrian ambassador's voice rose. "From whom? You? A single human in dress uniform?" The crowd had grown larger now, delegates from multiple species gathering to witness what was becoming a public humiliation. Marcus could see aides recording the encounter, no doubt preparing reports for their home worlds about human weakness. "I serve at the pleasure of Earth's government," Marcus replied evenly. "My duty is to ensure the safety and security of all delegates aboard this station." "How noble!" the Corvani war leader sneered. "But what happens when duty meets reality? When the pretty uniform faces actual danger?" The question was loaded with implication. Marcus had seen this before during his years of service. Alien species testing human resolve, probing for signs of weakness they could exploit in negotiations. The Royal Guard's reputation was built on incidents like this one. "Reality and duty are not mutually exclusive," Marcus said. "One informs the other." "Pretty words," the ambassador said, stepping closer until he was inches from Marcus's face. "But I prefer action. Perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your capabilities in a more private setting?" The suggestion sent murmurs through the crowd. Several delegates exchanged glances, sensing the escalation. Marcus felt the familiar tension building in his shoulders, the combat awareness that years of training had burned into his reflexes. "I'm afraid that's impossible," Marcus replied. "Regulations prohibit." "Regulations!" The war leader's roar echoed through the corridor. "Always hiding behind rules and protocols. Is this what Earth produces? Bureaucrats in soldiers' clothing?" The insult struck deeper than intended. Marcus had served in 3 major conflicts before joining the Royal Guard. He had led men into battle against impossible odds and brought them home alive. The suggestion that he was merely decorative touched a nerve that 20 years of discipline couldn't fully suppress. "My service record speaks for itself," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a new edge. "Does it?" The ambassador's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. "Then why don't you enlighten us? What great battles has the mighty Terran Royal Guard fought? What enemies have you conquered?" The crowd pressed closer, sensing blood in the water. Marcus could feel their anticipation, their hunger for human humiliation. These creatures saw Earth as upstart children pretending at galactic politics. They wanted to put humanity in its place. "The Guard serves peace," Marcus replied. "We prefer prevention to confrontation." "How convenient," the Thrix representative clicked. "Peace through weakness. A novel concept." "Peace through strength," Marcus corrected, his patience finally wearing thin. "Though I suspect the distinction is lost on some species." The insult was subtle, but unmistakable. Several delegates straightened, recognizing the shift in tone. The human was no longer simply absorbing their taunts. "Strength?" The war leader's laugh was like breaking stone. "You stand alone, outnumbered, armed with nothing but words. Where is this strength you speak of?" Marcus turned to face the massive creature directly, his gray eyes hard as steel. "Strength isn't always about numbers or weapons. Sometimes it's about knowing when to act and when to wait." "And what are you waiting for?" the ambassador pressed. "Permission? Backup? A miracle?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus could feel the weight of human reputation resting on his shoulders. Every word, every gesture would be analyzed and reported across a dozen worlds. Earth's standing in the galactic community could rise or fall based on this moment. "I'm waiting for someone to cross the line," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying a dangerous undertone that made several delegates step back instinctively. The ambassador's eyes narrowed, sensing something he hadn't expected. "And what line would that be?" The line between diplomatic posturing and actual threat, Marcus replied. The line between words and action. The line that separates those who understand consequences from those who don't. The corridor fell silent except for the soft hum of the station's life support systems. The mood had shifted from mockery to something more dangerous. The humans' calm demeanor hadn't cracked, but something else had emerged. Something that spoke of experience and capability that went beyond uniform and protocol. You speak of consequences, the war leader said slowly. What consequences could a single human pose to us? Marcus smiled then, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. That depends entirely on what you're willing to risk to find out. The threat was implicit, but unmistakable. Several delegates exchanged uncertain glances, suddenly aware that they might have misjudged their target. The human's composure was too complete, too professional. This wasn't the behavior of someone who could be easily intimidated. "Are you threatening us?" the ambassador asked, his voice rising in outrage. "I'm informing you," Marcus replied calmly, "about lines, consequences, and the difference between appearance and reality." The standoff stretched for long seconds, tension crackling through the air like static electricity. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, came the sound of slow, deliberate applause. All eyes turned to see Director Sarah Mitchell, Earth's chief diplomat, emerging from the crowd. Her expression was serene, but her eyes held a dangerous glint that Marcus recognized immediately. "Gentlemen," she said pleasantly, "I hope you're finding our facilities adequate for your needs." The temperature in the corridor seemed to drop several degrees as the implications of her arrival sank in. The human delegation had been watching, recording, waiting. "Director Mitchell," the ambassador said stiffly, his earlier confidence wavering. "We were simply engaging with your security personnel." "So I noticed," Mitchell replied, her smile never wavering. "Sergeant Chen, I trust these delegates haven't been interfering with your duties?" "No, ma'am," Marcus replied, snapping to attention. "Just answering questions about station security protocols." "Excellent," Mitchell said. "Perhaps our guests would like a more comprehensive demonstration of those protocols. I'm sure Sergeant Chen would be happy to arrange a tour of our security facilities." The offer was phrased as courtesy, but everyone present recognized it for what it was. A reminder that they were guests here, subject to human authority and human rules. "That won't be necessary," the war leader said quickly. "We have other obligations." "Of course you do," Mitchell agreed. "The treaty negotiations resume in 1 hour. I trust everyone will be prepared to discuss matters of mutual interest." The crowd began to disperse, delegates suddenly remembering urgent business elsewhere. But the damage was done. Lines had been drawn, challenges issued, and reputations tested. As the corridor emptied, Marcus remained at his post, eyes forward, breathing steady. But something had changed in those few minutes of confrontation. The careful balance of respect and fear that governed galactic diplomacy had shifted. The aliens had come seeking to intimidate a human. Instead, they had awakened something they didn't understand. Something that would soon teach them why Earth's Royal Guard carried a reputation that reached across the stars. The game had only just begun. The emergency klaxons began wailing at 0300 hours, shattering the peaceful quiet of Kepler Station's night cycle. Marcus Chen was instantly awake, muscle memory from decades of service bringing him to full alertness before his conscious mind even processed the sound. Red emergency lighting bathed the diplomatic quarters in an ominous glow as Marcus reached for his communications device. The message was brief but chilling. Code Black, multiple breaches on levels 7 through 12, all security personnel to emergency stations. Code Black meant hostile boarding action. Someone had attacked the station. Marcus was dressed and moving within 30 seconds, his service weapon checked and secured at his hip. As he stepped into the corridor, he nearly collided with Ambassador Kellens, Earth's senior diplomat, who was emerging from his quarters in a hastily thrown-on robe. "Sergeant Chen, what's happening?" Kellens demanded, his face pale in the red light. "Unknown hostiles have boarded the station, sir," Marcus replied, his training kicking in automatically. "I need to get you to the secure bunker immediately." "What about the other delegates?" "That's not our primary concern right now, sir." Marcus was already moving, guiding Kellens toward the emergency shelter built into the station's core. "My orders are to protect Earth personnel first." As they moved through the corridors, Marcus's communication device crackled with reports from other security teams. The picture that emerged was grim. Unidentified ships had somehow bypassed the station's defenses and deployed boarding parties at multiple points. The attackers were moving with military precision toward the diplomatic quarters. "This is no random pirate raid," Marcus muttered, analyzing the attack patterns being reported. "Someone planned this specifically to target the summit." They reached the emergency bunker just as Director Mitchell arrived with her security detail. The reinforced chamber was designed to withstand everything short of a direct hit from a capital ship's main guns. "Status report," Mitchell ordered as the heavy blast doors sealed behind them. 12 confirmed breaches, reported Lieutenant Torres, Earth's security chief. Attackers appear to be Corvani military units, though they're not broadcasting any identification. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The same species that had mocked human weakness just hours earlier was now attacking the station. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. "Where are the other delegations?" Kellens asked. "Unknown," Torres replied grimly. "Station security lost contact with most sections after the initial breach." "They could be dead," Mitchell said quietly. "Or worse, captured." The implications hung heavy in the air. If the other delegates were killed or taken hostage during an attack on a human-administered station, Earth's reputation would be destroyed. Decades of careful diplomacy would crumble overnight. "Ma'am," Marcus said suddenly, "I request permission to conduct a reconnaissance mission." Mitchell looked at him sharply. "Absolutely not. Your orders are to remain here and protect the delegation." "With respect, ma'am, if those delegates die on our watch, there won't be a delegation worth protecting," Marcus replied. "Someone needs to gather intelligence on the attackers' capabilities and intentions." "That's what station security is for," Torres interjected. "You're not equipped for combat operations." Marcus almost smiled at that. If these people only knew what Royal Guard training actually entailed. But those details were classified at levels that even diplomatic staff couldn't access. "Sir, I'm the most qualified person here for this type of mission," Marcus said carefully. "My background includes specialized training that might prove relevant." Mitchell studied him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her weighing options. She knew more about his background than she was letting on, he realized. The Royal Guard didn't just recruit random soldiers. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked finally. "Let me scout the adjacent sections, confirm the status of the other delegations, and assess the tactical situation," Marcus said. "If they're alive, we might be able to coordinate a defense. If they're not," he shrugged, "at least we'll know what we're dealing with." Another explosion shook the station, closer this time. The lights flickered momentarily before the emergency power systems compensated. "They're getting closer," Torres observed unnecessarily. Mitchell made her decision. "Go, but you maintain constant contact, and if I order you back, you return immediately. Is that understood?" "Understood, ma'am." Marcus checked his weapon one final time and moved toward the emergency exit that led to the maintenance tunnels. "Sergeant," Mitchell called as he reached the door, "be careful. We can't afford to lose you." Marcus nodded and stepped into the maze of service corridors that honeycombed the station. The emergency lighting here was dimmer, casting long shadows between the pipes and conduits that lined the walls. He moved with practiced silence, his senses alert for any sign of the attackers. The maintenance tunnels were designed to allow repair crews access to every part of the station. They also provided an excellent means of moving unseen through hostile territory. Marcus had memorized the layout during his first week aboard, a habit that was now proving invaluable. He reached an access point near the Zephyrian quarters and carefully opened the grating. The corridor beyond was empty, but signs of violence were everywhere. Scorch marks on the walls, debris scattered across the floor, and the acrid smell of energy weapons hanging in the air. Marcus slipped into the corridor and began moving toward the guest quarters. His communication device was set to passive mode, recording everything he encountered for later analysis. Whatever was happening here, Earth's intelligence services would want a complete record. He found the first body near the luminary delegation's quarters. The ethereal being had been cut down by some kind of high-energy weapon, its gaseous form now dissipated across the corridor floor. The sight sent a chill down Marcus's spine. The luminary were pacifists, posing no threat to anyone. This wasn't just an attack. It was a massacre. Moving deeper into the diplomatic section, Marcus began to hear voices. He pressed himself against the wall and moved carefully toward the source of the sound. Around the corner, he could see a group of Corvani soldiers surrounding several captive delegates. The sight made his blood run cold. The survivors had been forced to their knees in the center of the corridor. The Zephyrian ambassador who had mocked Marcus earlier was among them, his forearms bound behind his back, his yellow eyes wide with terror. "Where are the humans?" one of the Corvani soldiers was demanding, his bone armor gleaming wetly in the emergency lighting. "I told you they're in the secure bunker," the Thrix representative chittered, its compound eyes reflecting the red light. "We cannot access it." "Then we'll make them come to us," the soldier replied. He raised his weapon toward one of the kneeling delegates. Marcus had seen enough. These weren't random pirates or even rogue soldiers. This was a carefully planned operation designed to eliminate or capture key diplomatic figures. And they were about to start executing hostages to draw out the human delegation. He keyed his communication device. "Control? This is Chen. I have visual on hostile forces and surviving delegates. Recommend immediate action." "Negative," came Torres's voice. "Return to bunker immediately." "Sir, they're about to execute prisoners. I can prevent it." "That's not your mission, Sergeant. Return now." Marcus looked at the scene before him. 7 delegates kneeling in terror while armed soldiers prepared to kill them one by one. The smart play was to follow orders, return to the bunker, and wait for station security or military backup that might never come. But Marcus Chen hadn't survived 20 years of service by always making the smart play. "Sorry, sir," he said quietly into his communicator. "Communication problems. Breaking up. Can't. Situation unclear." He switched off the device and checked his weapon. 1 human against 12 Corvani soldiers wasn't good odds by any reasonable measure. But reasonable measures had never been part of Royal Guard training. The first soldier never saw him coming. Marcus moved like a shadow along the corridor wall, using the emergency lighting and scattered debris for concealment. His combat knife slid between the Corvani's bone armor plates with surgical precision, severing major arteries before the creature could cry out. The body dropped silently to the floor, just as one of his companions turned to check their perimeter. Marcus was already moving, flowing from cover to cover with the fluid grace of a predator. The second soldier fell with a crushed windpipe before he could raise his weapon. "Where did Koreth go?" one of the remaining soldiers called out, finally noticing that 2 of their number had vanished. Marcus smiled grimly in the darkness. The hunt had begun. The Corvani were excellent soldiers by galactic standards. They were strong, well-armed, and experienced in combat. But they had made one critical error. They had assumed they were hunting prey, not walking into the territory of an apex predator. Marcus had been trained by the Royal Guard's most elite instructors, men and women who had learned their craft in the bloodiest conflicts humanity had ever fought. He had been selected not just for his physical capabilities, but for his ability to think like both soldier and assassin when the situation demanded it. The Corvani were about to discover why Earth's royal guard had never lost a protectee in active service. The third soldier died when he stepped away from the group to investigate a suspicious sound. Marcus dropped on him from an overhead maintenance shaft, his weight and momentum driving his knife through the creature's skull with lethal efficiency. "Sound the alarm!" the squad leader shouted as he realized they were under attack. "We have contact!" But Marcus was already gone, melted back into the shadows like smoke. The remaining soldiers formed a defensive circle around their prisoners, weapons raised and scanning for threats that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Show yourself, coward!" the leader roared. "Face us with honor!" Marcus's voice echoed from the shadows, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. "Honor? You speak of honor while murdering unarmed diplomats?" An energy bolt scorched the wall where the voice had seemed to originate, but found only empty air. Marcus was already moving, circling his prey like a wolf stalking a herd. "I am Commander Brutask of the Corvani hegemony," the leader declared. "These creatures are prisoners of war, taken in legitimate military action." "There is no war here," Marcus replied, his voice now coming from a different direction entirely. "Only murder and cowardice." Another soldier panicked and fired wildly into the shadows, his shots illuminating the corridor in brief strobing flashes. In those moments of light, the Corvani caught glimpses of a figure moving with inhuman speed and precision, there 1 second and gone the next. "It's just one human!" Brutask snarled. "Find him and kill him!" But even as he gave the order, Brutask was beginning to understand the trap they had walked into. This wasn't some decorative guard playing at soldier. This was something else entirely, something that moved like death itself through the darkness. Marcus struck again, this time taking 2 soldiers simultaneously. He dropped from the ceiling between them, his knife finding one's throat, while his sidearm put a silent pulse through the second's chest. Both creatures fell before their companions could react. "7 left," Marcus announced calmly, his voice echoing through the corridor. 7 soldiers against 1 human. I wonder what your superiors will think of those odds. The remaining Corvani huddled closer together, their earlier confidence evaporating like mist. They had come here to intimidate and terrorize. Instead, they found themselves being hunted by something that should have been easy prey. "You cannot hide forever, human," Brutask called out, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty now. "We have reinforcements coming." "Do you?" Marcus asked conversationally. "Because from what I've observed, you're rather isolated here. Cut off from your ships, outnumbered by station security, and now being picked apart by a single guard you thought was merely decorative." The psychological warfare was having its effect. Marcus could see the soldiers' discipline beginning to crack. They were looking over their shoulders, jumping at shadows, turning their weapons on each other when movement caught their peripheral vision. "Perhaps," Marcus continued, "you're beginning to understand why Earth's Royal Guard has the reputation it does. We don't just stand around looking pretty, we prepare for situations exactly like this one." A 4th soldier fell when he broke formation to investigate a sound, stepping directly into Marcus's killing zone. The human seemed to materialize out of thin air, ending the Corvani's life in a single efficient motion before vanishing again. 6 left, Marcus announced pleasantly. But who's counting? Commander Brutask watched his soldiers die one by one, each death more terrifying than the last. This human didn't just kill. He orchestrated fear like a symphony conductor, turning every shadow into a potential threat, every sound into harbinger of doom. "Fall back to the main corridor," Brutask ordered, his voice tight with growing desperation. "Maintain visual contact with each other at all times." The surviving Corvani dragged their prisoners with them as they retreated, using the captive delegates as human shields. But even this tactical advantage seemed meaningless against an enemy who could appear and disappear at will. Marcus watched them move from his position in the ceiling access shaft, calculating angles and opportunities. The Corvani were learning, adapting their tactics, which made them more dangerous but also more predictable. Fear was making them conservative, and conservative enemies made mistakes. "You know," Marcus said, his voice drifting down from somewhere above, "your species has quite a reputation as warriors. I'm curious, is this how Corvani military doctrine typically handles a single opponent?" "Shut up!" one of the soldiers snapped, firing blindly at the ceiling. The energy bolt scorched metal and plastic but found no target. "I'm genuinely interested," Marcus continued conversationally. "On Earth, we have a saying, if you find yourself in a fair fight, your tactics are wrong. But this hardly seems fair, does it? 6 armed soldiers against 1 human with a sidearm." Brutask snarled in frustration. The human was doing something that went beyond simple combat. He was conducting psychological warfare on a level the commander had never encountered. Every word was calculated to undermine his soldiers' confidence and cohesion. "We could negotiate," Brutask called out, trying a different approach. "Surely this situation benefits no one." "Oh, I don't know," Marcus replied, amusement clear in his voice. "I'm learning quite a bit about Corvani military capabilities. Or should I say, lack thereof." The insult hit its mark. Corvani culture was built around martial prowess and military honor. To be mocked for weakness by what they considered an inferior species was almost unbearable. "We will skin you alive when we find you, human," another soldier growled. "We will make you beg for death." "That's an interesting negotiating position," Marcus observed. "Tell me, does intimidation usually work well for your species? Because from where I'm standing, it seems to have some significant drawbacks." As if to punctuate his point, Marcus struck again. This time he came through a maintenance hatch behind the group, moving with liquid silence. His knife found the throat of the soldier who had made the threat, while his other hand covered the creature's mouth to prevent any outcry. The body dropped silently to the floor, just as the others turned to check their rear. By the time they looked back, Marcus had vanished again, leaving only a corpse and the growing scent of fear. "5 left," Marcus announced cheerfully. "We're making excellent progress." Brutask felt his composure cracking. This wasn't how combat was supposed to work. Enemies were supposed to face each other directly, test strength against strength, honor against honor. This shadow warfare was alien to everything the Corvani understood about proper conflict. "You fight like a coward," Brutask accused. "Face us with honor." "Honor?" Marcus's voice carried a dangerous edge now. "You speak of honor while holding innocent diplomats at gunpoint? While attacking a peaceful station under diplomatic protection? I think we have different definitions of that word." The Zephyrian ambassador, still kneeling with the other prisoners, looked up with his large yellow eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt something like hope. The human he had mocked hours earlier was systematically dismantling their captors with terrifying efficiency. "Besides," Marcus continued, his tone returning to conversational, "I was trained to win, not to provide entertainment. If you wanted a fair fight, you should have brought more soldiers." Another Corvani fell as he tried to reach a communication panel to call for backup. Marcus appeared behind him like a ghost, ending his life before he could touch the controls. The human's movements were so fluid, so economical, that it seemed less like combat and more like a deadly dance. 4, Marcus counted helpfully. "Though I notice your reinforcements haven't arrived yet. Should I be concerned about that?" The truth was, there were no reinforcements coming. Marcus had been monitoring Corvani communications since the attack began, and their ship had been destroyed by station defenses shortly after launching the boarding parties. These soldiers were stranded here with no hope of extraction. But he didn't need to tell them that. Let them wonder. Let them hope. It would make their eventual defeat all the more crushing. "You cannot keep this up forever," Brutask said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Eventually, you will make a mistake." "Possibly," Marcus agreed. "But how many of your soldiers will die before that happens? 3? 2? All of them?" The remaining Corvani were pressed tightly together now, their weapons pointing in every direction. They had lost all semblance of military formation, reduced to a frightened cluster waiting for death to come from the shadows. "I have a proposal," Marcus said suddenly, his voice taking on a businesslike tone. "Release the prisoners, surrender your weapons, and I'll consider taking you alive for questioning." "Never," Brutask roared. "We are Corvani. We do not surrender to inferior species." "Inferior?" Marcus sounded genuinely curious. "I'm not sure I understand. 4 of your soldiers are dead, your mission has failed, and you're trapped on a hostile station with no hope of escape. In what way, exactly, are you superior?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everything the Corvani believed about their own supremacy was being systematically dismantled by the actions of a single human they had dismissed as decorative. "We are stronger," one of the soldiers insisted desperately. "Are you?" Marcus asked. "Because your friends seemed quite fragile when I tested that theory." Another soldier died trying to rush the last position they had heard Marcus's voice. He found only empty air and a knife between his ribs for his trouble. Marcus melted back into the darkness before the others could react. 3 left, he announced. "This is becoming almost anticlimactic." Brutask was beginning to understand something that terrified him more than his own death. This human wasn't just killing his soldiers, he was proving a point, demonstrating that all of their assumptions about human weakness were not just wrong, but catastrophically so. "What are you?" Brutask asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm exactly what you saw hours ago," Marcus replied softly. "A guard doing his duty. The difference is that you mistook decoration for weakness, protocol for inability, and restraint for fear." The Thrix representative, still bound and kneeling, looked up at the remaining Corvani soldiers with her compound eyes. For the first time, she truly understood what she was witnessing. This wasn't just combat, it was a lesson in the dangers of underestimating one's opponents. "You see," Marcus continued, "you made the same mistake that many species make when they first encounter humans. You judged us by your own standards, through your own cultural lens. You assumed that because we prefer diplomacy to violence, we must be weak. Because we follow protocols, we must be inflexible. Because we speak softly, we must be afraid." An 8th soldier fell, this one taken down by a precisely thrown knife that severed his spinal cord. Marcus retrieved the weapon before the body hit the ground, moving like smoke through the emergency lighting. 2 left, he said pleasantly. "But I think we're reaching the end of our demonstration." The last 2 soldiers had backed themselves against a wall, using the captive delegates as human shields. Their weapons were trained on the prisoners, fingers on triggers, ready to execute them all if the human showed himself. "Come out now, or we kill them all!" Brutask screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "You're going to kill them anyway," Marcus pointed out reasonably. "That was your plan from the beginning. Execute the delegates, blame it on human incompetence, and use the incident to justify further aggression against Earth." The accuracy of his assessment sent chills through the survivors. This human had understood their strategy from the beginning, had perhaps even anticipated it. "But here's what you didn't account for," Marcus continued, his voice now carrying absolute certainty. "You didn't consider what would happen when you threatened people under the protection of Earth's royal guard. You didn't think about the consequences of attacking a human station, and you certainly didn't prepare for the possibility that your decorative target might actually be dangerous. The corridor filled with a new sound, the heavy footsteps of approaching security forces. Station security had finally organized a response, and they were converging on this location, but it was too late to save the Corvani soldiers. "Sounds like your time is up," Marcus observed. "Last chance to surrender." "Never!" Brutask raised his weapon toward the nearest prisoner. That was when Marcus finally revealed himself, stepping out of the shadows with his sidearm trained on the commander's head. But he wasn't alone. Somehow, impossibly, there were 3 other figures moving with him, all carrying the same weapons, all moving with the same lethal precision. "Holographic projectors," Marcus explained conversationally, noting the Corvani's confusion. "Standard Royal Guard equipment for situations exactly like this one. Sometimes the appearance of numbers is just as effective as actual numbers." The truth was even simpler than that. Marcus had been using the station's security system against his enemies, creating false sensor readings and holographic duplicates to confuse and disorient them. What looked like multiple attackers had been one human using technology and tactics the Corvani didn't understand. "Drop your weapons," Marcus ordered, his voice now carrying absolute authority. "Now." The last 2 soldiers looked at each other, then at the multiple human figures surrounding them, then at their commander who was standing frozen with a gun pointed at his head. The fight went out of them like air from a punctured balloon. Their weapons clattered to the floor as station security forces poured into the corridor. But the real surprise came when the prisoners were released and helped to their feet. The Zephyrian ambassador approached Marcus slowly, his yellow eyes filled with something that might have been respect. I owe you an apology, guardsman." Marcus holstered his weapon and straightened his uniform. "No apology necessary, Ambassador. I was simply doing my duty." "Your duty?" The Thrix representative chittered softly. "Is this what you call duty?" "Protecting the innocent and preserving the peace," Marcus replied matter-of-factly. "That's what I swore an oath to do." Director Mitchell arrived with the rest of the human delegation, her expression carefully neutral as she surveyed the scene. 8 dead Corvani soldiers, dozens of rescued diplomats, and 1 royal guard who didn't even appear winded. "Sergeant Chen," she said formally, "I believe I ordered you to remain in the bunker." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied without the slightest hint of apology. "Communication difficulties prevented me from acknowledging that order." Mitchell almost smiled at that. "I see. And these communication difficulties, are they resolved now?" "Completely resolved, ma'am." As the delegates were escorted to safety and the bodies were removed, word of what had happened began to spread throughout the station. The story would grow in the telling, as stories always do, but the core facts remained unchanged. 1 human guard had single-handedly defeated 12 elite Corvani soldiers while rescuing multiple diplomatic hostages. The species that had mocked human weakness that morning were now requesting immediate diplomatic meetings to discuss mutual understanding and cooperation. In the days that followed, Marcus noticed a distinct change in how the alien delegates treated him. The casual dismissiveness was gone, replaced by something that looked remarkably like respect. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms, not from discomfort, but from deference. The Corvani hegemony issued a formal apology for the rogue military action and offered substantial reparations to all affected parties. They also specifically requested that their future diplomatic missions be conducted on Earth, under the protection of the Royal Guard. Marcus found the irony amusing. The same species that had questioned his qualifications now wanted him as their protector. But perhaps the most telling moment came a week later as the diplomatic summit finally concluded. The Zephyrian ambassador approached Marcus at his post, no longer the arrogant creature who had mocked human weakness. "Guard Chen," he said formally. "I wanted to thank you again for your service." "Just doing my job, sir," Marcus replied. The ambassador studied him for a long moment. "May I ask you something? When my people insulted you, questioned your capabilities, threatened your reputation, why didn't you respond? You could have ended the confrontation immediately." Marcus considered the question seriously before answering. "Because strength without restraint is just violence, Ambassador, and violence without purpose is just destruction. My purpose is to protect and serve, not to prove points or settle scores." "But you did prove a point," the ambassador observed, rather decisively. "No, sir," Marcus corrected gently. "I demonstrated a principle. There's a difference." As the various delegations prepared to depart, each carried with them a new understanding of humanity's place in the galactic community. Earth was no longer the newcomer to be tested and challenged. They were the species whose guards could single-handedly destroy elite military units while maintaining perfect diplomatic protocol. Marcus returned to his post by the diplomatic chambers, resuming the same stance he had maintained for weeks. To casual observers, nothing had changed. He was still the same human in the same uniform, standing in the same position. But everything had changed. The game of galactic politics had new rules now, and humanity had just announced that they were players, not pieces. Word spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The story of the human guard who had turned a diplomatic incident into a military disaster for one of the most feared warrior species became legend. Other species began reassessing their own assumptions about human capabilities. Trade agreements that had been stalled for months suddenly moved forward. Territorial disputes that had seemed intractable found peaceful solutions. Military buildups along human borders were quietly scaled back. It turned out that respect, once earned, was far more effective than fear in maintaining peace. Marcus Chen continued his duty, standing guard over diplomats and delegates who no longer questioned his qualifications. He had proven that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate, and that true strength lies not in the ability to fight, but in knowing when fighting becomes necessary. The Royal Guard's motto was inscribed on a plaque by his post: "Strength through service, peace through vigilance." For the first time since arriving at Kepler Station, the alien delegates truly understood what those words meant, and in the depths of space, other species began to wonder what other surprises humanity might have in store for them. The humans who preferred diplomacy to war, who spoke softly and carried hidden weapons, who turned protocol into strategy and service into strength. They had tried to intimidate him. Instead, they had awakened something that would reshape the balance of power across the galaxy. The age of underestimating humanity was over. The Guard had taught them why.